Hello, here is Taras Timo from Lviv again with an update on the war in Ukraine. And today we have a special joy, which is untypical for my reports because usually I'm reporting on quite grim and tragic events. But thanks God, 2 days ago we had a very joyful evening, very unexpected one. That the defenders of Mariupol, at least part of them, were set free by Russians as the consequence of an exchange of our prisoners of war with their prisoners of war. So that was a very unexpected and very joyful event I'm going to focus on today, and some few more updates from what's going on here. I will speak briefly about the situation on the fronts, but mostly on the excavation of mass graves in the freed Kharkiv region in the northeast of Ukraine, in around the city of Izum and in some other places. Unfortunately, the casualties are very high. There are many civilians and Ukrainian soldiers who were murdered there, not in battle, but soldiers who were prisoners of war, and then they were tortured and killed. Now those mass graves are being excavated, exhumated, and we will see some details on that. And also I will briefly discuss the topic of large-scale mobilization in Russia that is happening now, following the order from President Vladimir Putin that was issued 2 days ago, and there are already many developments connected with that, some of which you might have heard already reported in the media, and perhaps some will be new. So please follow this video to see my take on these 3 points. Well, first of all, in the late evening of September 21, we started getting those messages on various social media that something is going on the border between Ukraine and Russia in Chernihiv region, just north of Kyiv. And there was a whole line of ambulances waiting for someone, for some people. We didn't know what's happening, but then all of a sudden a couple of buses from the Russian territory came, and our prisoners of war started to appear from those buses and walk towards Ukrainian side, where some soldiers and some representatives of the authorities, together with medical personnel, were waiting for them. And that was happening like 11 o'clock in the night. It was quite unexpected, and the social media bursted with the news that many defenders of Mariupol are being set free as a consequence of a large exchange of prisoners of war between Ukraine and Russia. Here you can see just a group of those soldiers that are greeted by the Ukrainian side with the Ukrainian flag. Most of them come from this detention facility in Olenivka, of which I reported before, that was bombed or somehow exploded, and many Ukrainian prisoners of war were killed there. So we knew, we had numerous reports of killings and torture in those facilities like Olenivka and in Donetsk, Makeyevka, other places where these people were held. And also we knew that the commanders of the Azov battalion and other military units that were defending Mariupol were taken to Moscow, and they were being prepared for a kind of court trial for the crimes against humanity as Nazis. So the Russian propaganda wanted to orchestrate a large pseudo court of justice for the leadership of Azov and other defendants of Mariupol. And we also knew that they are pressured and probably tortured. So people were extremely stressed, and we were all praying and hoping that someday they will be released, but there was very little hope, honestly speaking, on their quick release. So this news came as a great surprise. By the way, that was the day of the Nativity of the Mother of God, a great religious feast, and some people said this is like a miracle of the Mother of God that they were released on that precise date despite all the hopes. So first we saw these ordinary soldiers from Azov and other military units from Mariupol, and then all of a sudden we saw also the 5 commanders of Azov and other units that were freed from Russian captivity, but they were not brought to Chernihiv region as the other 200 soldiers who were set free, but they were brought, these 5 men of the military command, they were brought to Ankara, to Turkey, because President Erdogan kind of took his personal initiative to keep them, to take them from Putin and to keep them there as guests, not prisoners, but as his personal guests till the end of the war. So on that condition, those 5 men were freed. So here you can see Ukrainian internal affairs minister and the chief of Ukrainian intelligence services on the 2 flanks, and then the 5 military men in the middle. These are the command of the Azov and other units that were released that day. The miracle was possible due to this humble man you can see here on the picture, Viktor Medvedchuk, who was very close, one of the Ukrainian politicians who were very close to Vladimir Putin and is considered kind of personal friend and personal ally of Putin, through whom Putin did most of his dirty dealings in Ukraine since 2001, when Medvedchuk was at the height of his power as a staff, as a kind of vice president of Ukraine almost. He was the chief of staff for then President Kuchma in 2001 till 2004. And then he was just an oligarch, influential oligarch in the country, who, following the Russian invasion in February, tried to flee Ukraine. And you can see on the other picture him dressed in a military uniform because he was kind of masquerading for a Ukrainian soldier and was hiding in Ukraine. He was captured by Ukrainian security forces, interrogated for many days. His testimonies were written down. He probably possessed tons of valuable information, and now he was traded. He personally was traded for 200 Ukrainian soldiers plus 15 foreign nationals who were captured in Ukraine fighting for Ukraine, and they were sentenced to death. Some of them at least were sentenced to death in the Donetsk People's Republic by the pseudo court. And so these 215 men were exchanged for Medvedchuk, and then 55 military men from Russia who were prisoners of war on our side, they were exchanged for 5 commanders of the regiment from Mariupol. So that was a great evening, and now we are starting to see interviews with the soldiers who returned to Ukraine. Obviously they were greeted by their comrades, but by their families, and that's a very positive event that happened recently. Following this event, a Russian patriotic, nationalistic media bursted with a lot of resentment and anger towards their government, because they were hoping that especially the leadership of Azov, they will be brought to court and finally eventually executed. And one of those men you can see on the picture, he's kind of a prominent, not informal leader of those extreme chauvinistic forces in Russia. He's fighting now in Ukraine. On one picture you can see him meeting with the head of the Crimea Peninsula, the Russian appointed governor of Crimea. And here on the left you can see him in the military uniform, and also him holding a Nazi flag. So so much for denazification of Ukraine. People who are fighting on that side are themselves professed Nazis. But he wrote an infamous post on his Telegram channel that after this trade-off of prisoners of war, we are not willing to take any more prisoners. We will not take alive Ukrainian soldiers. We will torture and kill them. And then he goes on describing how to torture Ukrainian soldiers and how to kill them effectively. Well, obviously he doesn't represent the whole Russian army, and he is not an official representative, but his replicas reflect the attitudes of many people who went voluntarily to kill Ukrainians in Ukraine. Now, with the liberated Kharkiv region after a great counteroffensive Ukrainian forces had 2 weeks ago, we are starting to discover the atrocities that happened in that territory. Here on those pictures you will see like improvised detention facility, which is just torture chambers and basements refurbished for keeping civilians and prisoners of war in various towns around Kharkiv, and often those places were spontaneously organized, and they could hold something like 100 people, but more than 400 people were jammed into those cages and tortured and sometimes killed there. The fact that they were killed, we know from the fact of spontaneous mass graves that are discovered in forests and in the fields in the Kharkiv region. In some, like in this one, we can see even little crosses with the inscriptions who is buried there, but mostly they are anonymous. And like in this case, the whole family is buried, a father and a mother and a child, and the child is just 6 years old. She was probably, the whole family was probably killed in indiscriminate shelling by Russian troops. And these graves date from March, when huge heavy fighting was going on in that region. Here is the girl who is buried here. Now I will show you some pictures. They are extremely grim and graphic of the excavations, exhumations from the forest near Izum town in Kharkiv region. And here are just medical experts who work with mass graves, and they are discovering them, undigging the bodies, and documenting everything for international courts of human rights. Russians already are starting to throw in messages that these people were killed by Ukrainians themselves to stage to set up Russian army, which is obviously complete rubbish, because there are already numerous pictures taken by Russian soldiers themselves of the process of digging those holes in the ground and burying bodies. With the social media and with the lack of brains with some Russian soldiers, they are documenting their crimes like in real time themselves. So now our journalists, our investigators simply have to look at the Facebook or other profiles of some Russian soldiers to harvest a lot of information about their crimes from there. And finally, there is this huge wave of refugees, so to speak, from Russia, because Putin has declared what he calls limited mobilization, with a benchmark of 300,000 male who should be under 35 and with an experience of military service. So they will be enlisted for Russian army immediately. But informally, the law that prescribes this is written in such a way that it will not be limited to 300,000, but probably the real goal is up to 1 million. So they want to increase the size of Russian infantry, of Russian simple army, so to speak, to 1 million, and to send them as a meat to die in the fields of Ukraine. So many males who have enough wisdom and who have means to escape that started to do so. So there are like 35 kilometers long lines on the Russian-Finnish border and even on Russian-Mongolian border in far east in Siberia, of people who lined up to escape Russia before the borders are permanently closed for the males that or some female who are under the obligation to serve in army. We will see what will happen. There are some small revolts happening already in some Russian cities, but obviously they will not lead to immediate change of Russian politics. We should wait for much longer for that. Well, you can see I'm wearing a T-shirt with the sign of the White Cross that has become the symbol of this counter-offensive in the northeast of Ukraine, in Kharkiv region, and I just purchased this T-shirt from a friend of mine, Andriy Dankovich, who is a painter. He is actually a comics painter, but he paints a lot now on the war in Ukraine. You can see some images of him, of Ukrainian soldiers, and especially these portraitic images of defenders of Mariupol. And he has made this T-shirt with Reconquista, Ukrainian Reconquista, reconquering the territories, and I felt like I want to draw your attention to his paintings and what he produces. There is his website you might want to check just to see his works. Finally, last but not least, I just stumbled across this picture that spoke to me. It says, "You don't need to be Ukrainian to support Ukraine. You just need to be human." And we feel that support. We are grateful for that support in whatever form it comes from people who support our refugees, who support Ukraine in whatever form they find appropriate. And we call for further support of Ukraine. Please share the news from Ukraine, share these videos, write your comments under the videos, like them. It helps really to raise awareness and to spread the word about the events that are happening here. And if you can, please support us financially. As you know, I'm running this kind of modest fundraising campaign for the Ukrainian army. I'm passing all the money you are sending to the volunteers who buy stuff for Ukrainian army, military or medical supplies, which are badly needed now at the beginning of the long and cold winter the needs of the army are even bigger. So if you can send something, we will be always grateful for that. And please pray for Ukraine that even with this mobilization, with this escalation of fighting that is imminent, we will still stay strong and win in this terrible war. Thank you for watching.